chair slides share with 0 seconds to spare. How's that?
Just in time chairing.
All right. Just in time sharing. Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that a supply chain problem?
We'll give another minute or two for people to wander in, since it's very early morning for some of us.
I'm sorry, 5 o'clock is early in the morning. 2 is, late the night before.
2 is a little rough. I'm glad that this is my last 2 a.m. meeting. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, the next one is gonna be, and yeah, no problem.
Philadelphia will be much nicer for us West Coast folk, regardless of what the world status is. I should make it to that. All right.
Joey, where are you located?
Right now in Spain.
Ah, so good time zone for you.
Yeah, I'm a happy cookie this time.
All right. Well, numbers are getting fairly stable.
It looks like you have actual humans there.
Have what?
Actual humans. Hello, people. Hello, people in real life.
So I do have to show off my super spiffy Dane mug that Victor gave me, which is awesome.
There's a Dane mug.
There's a Dane mug. Oh, I don't have my camera on. I thought I had my camera on. That won't help unless I have my camera on. Well, yes. See?
That's nice. Nice and shiny.
Yeah, we see the mirror image version, but I didn't realize that Meet Echo didn't flip the image. So.
Well, so my camera is weird because it's actually upside down, and then I video process it to turn it right side up in order to keep the boom for the camera out of the way of my vision. I'm very strange like that. Only geeks would do crazy stuff like that. So.
How many meetings have you joined this? How many meetings have you joined this week with the upside down image, though?
Just one, just the one. So I don't even remember what that one was. But, let's go ahead and get started. It looks like numbers are getting fairly stable. There's nobody standing at the back of the room. This probably won't be a 2-hour meeting, so we have plenty of time. But so welcome to the Dane Authentication for Network Clients Everywhere dance. We need music, a meeting. So your chairs today are Wes Hardiker. Paul has taken over as are you the AD, Paul, for the group now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so Paul's taken over as the AD, newly indoctrinated into the IESG, and I'm really happy that Joey is offered to help us as my co-chair for dance. Thank you, Joey. The goal of this group is to shut down before I can no longer find icons to put on the titles page of all of our meetings. So this is the latest one. The good news is the internet keeps creating new stuff, so that probably isn't a problem. The note well, I'm sure all of you have read and processed the note well. The essential notes are be aware of what you're saying at a microphone, or else lawyers get involved, and nobody wants that. There's a bunch of BCPs that talk about it. The IETF has a code of conduct that we all live by, which includes treating people with respect, speaking slowly, and limiting the use of slang and terms that people don't understand. Dispute ideas by reasoned argument, not by violent disagreement, and use best engineering judgment. Finding the best solution for the whole of the internet is the goal of the IETF, and then contributing to ongoing work within the IETF. This is the working group information for dance. We have a data tracker, of course. We have a purpose. The mailing list is dance@ietf.org. I assume everybody is probably on it, but if you're not, there is the URL to join. We now have 3 active drafts to consider, 2 of which are adopted and the other one is not, as we'll talk about in a minute. This session is being recorded. We will do the queue management using the Meet Echo online site tool. So if you are in the room, please do use the mini client or I think that there's supposed to be a scannable URL in the room. I actually don't know. I hope you guys do if you're in the room. The agenda today, as I said, this probably will not take 2 hours unless we dive into a whole lot of discussion. We'll take 10 minutes for sharing related stuff. We already have, this is meeting number 2. We had 2 BOFs, and then this is meeting number 2, and we already have an implementation. So I'm super happy to hear that the hackathon actually had an implementation of dance-related stuff. So we'll get a presentation from them. Look what I did to the font. That's fun. The architecture document we'll talk about a little bit, and the solutions, 2 solutions documents, of course, we will talk about. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for open mic if people want to talk to things. Remember, one of the things we agreed to in framing the charter was these were sort of the target documents to start with. There are some other potential uses of dance technology that we were deliberately putting off until these sort of got out the door. So we're happy to talk about those, but they're not within scope until we get essentially these documents done-ish. So we did have a call for adoptions. I started it on February 28th, issued it for 3 weeks, which ended last week. The authors have recently published updates to those documents, so they are now draft IETF instead of draft Hugh, and the good news is that there seemed to be very good support for all of them. So those are now official working group documents. Thank you for everybody that helped respond with your willingness to participate and help with those documents. I will say that the mailing list has been generally quiet. If you look at the activity level on the mailing list, there is generally been very low volume of notes. So, that brings me a little bit of concern. We do want things to continue, and I realize we're early on in the documents, or may not at a point where we're ready to discuss the minutia of them. I hope we're getting to that point, but if you look at the message chart on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's not been a whole lot of messages. Most of the ones in February were responding to me saying, yes, I agree to help with the documents. So, our thoughts on, well, how can we increase discussion on the mailing list and get more work done would be, please have more discussion on the mailing list about the documents. Remember that providing early review and feedback is a good thing for the documents so that we don't wait for all the discussion to happen during last call. And then, of course, discussing, use cases and things like that is always a good thing to do too. So if anybody wants to speak to why there's not been a huge amount of discussion, I'm certainly willing to listen to arguments and things. But in the meantime, we'd like to see that pipe up. So. And then back to the agenda. So I think we're up to hackathon implementation results. I'm not quite sure of the couple of people who was going to present. Who is that this morning?
There's someone walking to the mic.
Or taking notes.
Okay.
Hello.
Oh, yes. And Tim is taking notes. Thank you, Tim, for being willing to take notes. And let me get your slides up. Are you doing it?
All right, thank you. So hello everyone, Guy Bertomina from AFNIC. Will present you briefly the implementation results that we've done during the hackathon, and also the use case that we have using LoRaWAN in IoT. Next slide, please. So as you already know, probably, we've worked on the 2 documents that are here. So the first one being the intent authentication, and the second one being the TLS extension to send the client ID to the server. Next slide, please. So for the first draft, we based on our implementation on an existing Dane library by Schumann. So we didn't re-implement the whole Dane validation. What we did, though, was creating testing environment. to emulate the our use case with a basic client and server doing mutual TLS authentication. And we implemented the extension, the TLS extension for both TLS 1.2 and 1.3. I'll get back to that later. Also, in case of the client ID being not sent in the extension, we fall back on using the subject alternative name from the certificate, but we still require the TLS extension to be present, just like there is like no extension data. Also, we have support for authorization rules so that we can process the client ID and according to whatever rules you want, well, accept the connection or reject it. The one we did, like the most basic one, and the one that was sufficient for us was just accepting all client ID on a given domain. So all client ID being like subdomain of a given domain list, we accept them and we reject everything else. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for the TLS extension implementation, we base our work on the Golang TLS library, and we extended that. So I just want to mention here that I was a bit confused on the implementation because on TLS 1.2, well, I don't know if it is a misunderstanding on my side or not, but on TLS 1.2, it seems that the client ID, well, the client is actually sending the extension first, and then the server is responding because it's using like client hello and server hello. But TLS 1.3 is using message, certificate request message and certificate message. So it is the server starting the, well, sending the extension first and then the client. And this causes issues because at the client hello part, we still don't have like this version negotiation. So we don't know whether or not to use TLS 1.2 or 1.3 for the server side. So if someone like want to clarify that now.
Hi, this is Hannes. Normally, you should be using this extension in the same way in 1.2 and 1.3 when it comes to the use of client and server hello. So there should be no difference whatsoever. So
you're saying that we should always use client hello and server hello and not the certificate request and certificate message?
Unless you have a very good reason to do so.
According to the draft, it's just that in TLS 1.3, we're using like certificate request and certificate message, and that this has the advantage to like not send the client ID on clear text.
That's a good question to look into. Yeah, let me have a look at that.
Schumann, you want to speak?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, so that is a good point. So the reason is, yeah, normally they should be the same. The reason they're slightly different is because of the need to encrypt the client extension because there are privacy concerns. And there's no way to do that in TLS 1.2 because it has to be sent in the client hello. In TLS 1.3, you can send the extension as part of the certificate request message, but you're right, that comes after the certificate has been prompted by the server side in the certificate request. So yeah, the order is a little bit different, but I don't think there's a way to do that with TLS 1.2. Right now, the draft says there's no way to implement privacy of the extension with TLS 1.2. So I think there were some folks recommending that, you know, this may be a new application or a greenfield application, and maybe we should only support TLS 1.3. But in the end, I think we decided that there may be kind of a deployed field of clients that use TLS 1.2, and we would have to support 1.2 as well.
Hi, this is Hannes again. But it could still be useful then to send, use the flags extension in the client hello of TLS 1.3 to indicate the support
Yeah.
of this specific extension, so that when the server sends this later on in the exchange, the client is not suddenly surprised and sees stuff that it's not supposed to.
Sure, yeah, that's fair. It could send an empty extension in the client hello, just to signal that it plans to use it. Sure, I mean, if there's support for doing that, we could enhance the draft.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, that's all that I needed to do to say in this slide. So yeah, thank you. We can move on to the next one. So a bit of context. Now this was kind of what I had to say about the implementation. I will just now speak about the use case that we have. So next slide, please. And I think you can go to the next one right now. Okay. So in the context of LoRaWAN, we have like devices that are provided by manufacturer, and to have like the security between the device and the application server, we're using pre-shared keys. So the manufacturer inject a key in the device and then share it with whatever actor that is involved. Next slide, please. So this key sharing can be done in different ways, either by using NFC if the device is compatible, or just printing back on the back of the device, or sent by mail, whatever. Next slide, please. So during the device onboarding, the device, so first, the network is divided in two parts, like the radio frequency space and the IP space. And when the device wants to join a network, so it will send a join request, and that will be intercepted by the network server. So the little cloud on the picture. So the network server will then resolve the address of the join server. So we're using like service discovery to know the join server associated with a device, and the join server will say if yes or no the device is allowed to join the network, and then using the pre-shared key, we will establish encrypted session between the device and the application server. So on our use case, we will not be focusing on the radio frequency space, and we'll see that in a moment, but just on the IP space. Next slide, please. So yeah, if we wanted like to achieve end-to-end security, so including the radio frequency space using like asymmetric key or certificate architecture, we would not be able to do that due to the very constrained network that we are having on the radio frequency space. As of right now, a compressed certificate will be like 146 bytes, and the size of the packet, the maximum size of packet is like 52 bytes. Yes?
There's a common misconception when people refer to some radio technologies, that they look at the MTU at a specific layer and then say it's X bytes. And then the perception is if you want to send something larger, it's not possible. Of course, it's possible because it just uses fragmentation.
Yeah. Sure. This is a fair point. In LoRaWAN, we have a very, very slow emission rate. So it's like one message in a few seconds or minutes. So if we were to use fragmentation here, it will just take a very long time. So that's why we rather not want to do fragmentation here. Next slide, please. So because of the constraint on the radio frequency space, we will just like be focusing on the IP space right now. And maybe if we have in the future a better way to encode certificate on a, or just public keys on very constrained well, packet size, will do end-to-end encryption from the device to the application server using public key. Right now, we'll stick to pre-shard key and only focus on the IP space for mutual authentication here. So the IP space is we have like different kind of servers. So I speak about the network server, joint server, application server. Those are servers that can be managed by different stakeholders. So at some point, we want to add some trust in that, and we're doing that using mutual authentication and a private PKI. Next slide. So the issue that we have, like with a common like PKI, like the web PKI, is that we don't have like the CA bundle available in all for the server to use directly. And even if we had that available, well, using a certificate that is like signed by a common CA have some cost. And even the free solution like Let's Encrypt have some issue because we have like constraint on the name that is not allowed by Let's Encrypt. Basically, we want to do names with like, I don't know, 16 or 20 labels, and Let's Encrypt doesn't allow that. So we resulted in the private PKI. So, but this means that we have like to distribute the root certificate to every entities, and that adds friction. Next slide, please. So this is like our architecture right now. Like we have like a root CA that is distributed intermediate CA that are signing certificate for each entity then. And on the bottom of the slide, you have like the DNS configuration, because as I said, we're using service discovery based on the device. So on the Journey UI's zone, you have like one record per device that is either pointing to directly the address of the joint server or a CNAME to the address of the joint server. And the net IDs is a similar zone for network servers. So this was just mentioned because I wanted to highlight the fact that we already have the need for a DNS, well, a zone having one entry per device and network server. Next slide, please. So because we have already one entry per device and network server, it doesn't really have a lot of friction to add a second one for the TLSA record. So this is, I think it's important because it doesn't have any more friction. Like if we didn't have this zone, it would mean that we had to manage the zone, but we're already managing it, so that doesn't really matter. So now with Dane, we just like doing the mutual authentication. So the network server will send the client ID or the Dane client ID using the TLS extension. And we have like the TLSA record on the network server zone. And on the other side, we have like the joint server having a TLSA record on the joint server zone. And we're basing on trust that every record, all right, this was my last slide anyway. So every record is into the same zone. So if we trust every record in this zone, we will keep like the trust that we needed at the first. So yeah, that's it. Questions or comments or whatever.
Shimon.
So the TLS protocol, does it run between a network server and the joint server, or between whom, or between the network server and the application server?
It is between the network server and the joint server.
Okay.
Well, right now the implementation that we use is using a single server for both the joint server and the application server. But ultimately, it is really between the joint server and the network server. We didn't expand it now to other well, communication. So, for example, like network server to network server and so on.
And but so the net if I recall LoRaWAN's sort of architecture correctly, was it not that the network server and the joint server actually belong to the same domain, like the same administrative domain, or?
Yes, they could. But we still have like, if we're doing roaming or so, we still have like different stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they are in the same domain, well, yes, especially if we're doing roaming. If everything is in the same domain, we don't have any much.
But I think the roaming part is something I read through the specifications last year, but my understanding was that they made an update to the specification to support roaming, but then there were some other entities involved that you didn't show. And I don't know where that specification actually went to, whether that's actually common these days, or whether that's they abandoned that effort. Maybe worthwhile just from the sake of sort of having the scenario and the entities properly lined up.
Yeah, I couldn't really say a lot of things on the roaming part. I know how we implemented it, but I'm not sure how is the state of the specification right now.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think it would be interesting to have the Dane client on a IoT device, because in some sense there's very little about IoT in this scenario because you are not running it it's essentially running on the network side between two servers. And it would be nice to have the Dane client on an IoT device, because that's where the constraints would show up. That's where you would see some of the maybe interactions with some low power networks or whatever. That could be interesting.
Yeah, ultimately that's what we want to do.
Okay.
But yeah, not we don't have that
And,
right
and
now.
maybe the Go client wouldn't be of much use there either, unfortunately.
Else with questions?
Yeah, I can go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for doing the implementation of the drafts. I was already planning to extend my library to support looking up a generalized TLSA record name to support this. So thanks for beating me to it. One more question I had. Does the Go TLS library still support no hooks or API to implement extensions? I see you had to fork the entire Go TLS library, which seems a little heavyweight, but I assume that's probably the reason. Is that right?
Yes, the Go library that doesn't really allow for much like extension or so. So I just had to fork it. It is not like ideal, and I know it, but I didn't really have another way to do that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so I guess it might be worth chatting with the Go folks to see if they are planning to implement a generalized API for people to be able to write new extensions rather than having to fork the whole thing. So that might be something worth looking into. Because I know OpenSSL and other libraries do have APIs to create extensions. But thank you.
Eventually, it'll all be in the base, and nobody will have to extend it at all, right?
Yeah,
that's true. We might get there too.
Hi, Hannes. Like from my experience, it's unavoidable to incorporate the functionality of the extensions into the core, because the extensions often require changes internal to the DLS stack. So I guess you will have no other route than sort of contributing your extension back into the core, and you would have to do the same for Mbed DLS, for Wolf SSL, and for OpenSSL for that matter. But they are
Uh,
all these folks are welcoming extensions in general. They're very open for contributions.
Okay, yeah, Hans, that's a good point. So I think with OpenSSL in the past, I've been able to implement the functionality of an extension just using their API to create a new extension, and they have callbacks for the TLS verification side on the server where you can add functionality. So, but you're right, in the general case, you may have to modify the guts of the library.
Yeah, for all the verification, I'm also using like callbacks for in the Go implementation. It's just that the extension itself couldn't be implemented like otherwise.
Gotcha, thanks.
With that, I don't see any more questions. Thank you very much for both the implementation and the discussion based on it. Fascinating work. Awesome to see it implemented so quickly.
Thank you.
We're for good progress. So thanks very much. All right, next up in the agenda is Oli with discussion about the architecture document or any of the authors that want to talk about it. I believe you are, there you are. Yep, fire away. So I don't think we have slides for this, so we will, I'll put the agenda back up. Do not hear you yet. Your microphone was on, but no actual audio. Trying again, still don't hear you. No luck so far.
Maybe leave and join again.
He's joined the audio a couple of times, but
Mm.
is not actually transmitting audio somehow. I don't know if it's a device selection problem or Joey's right. You could leave Meet Echo and come back and try again, but it could be a device configuration in the upper right-hand corner.
Permissions or something.
Yes, always could be permissions. We'll give him a minute. I think we have time, but otherwise we can switch and go on to Schumann with the solutions documents. All right, why don't we do that? So while you continue playing, why don't we switch to Schumann and you can talk about the solutions documents in the meantime? Schumann, go ahead. You need to raise your hand. Do you want to share the slides and control them, or do you want me to?
Actually, would you mind doing that?
Of course not.
Last time I tried, I messed up and most of everyone's time.
Well, a minute ago, I actually left the room by accident, so you know. All right, you should be good to go.
Okay, all right. So this is just an update on the status of the protocol documents. As you know, I've presented these drafts in detail at a number of earlier meetings, so I'm not planning to go through the entire protocol this time. So this will be quite brief, even though I see I've been given 40 minutes for this. And you might recall also that these documents have existed for quite a number of years, long before the dance working group was even envisioned. So next slide, please. And as you may have seen on the mailing list and what Wes mentioned, these two documents were formally adopted. And just yesterday, I renamed them with the working group document titles and pushed out the -00 versions of each of them. And they are the Dane TLS client authentication document and the TLS extension for conveying a client's Dane identity. Next slide, please. And there was really only one change that was made since the last revision, and that was to the TLS Dane client identity draft. So previously, the draft said that the TLS server may optionally send an empty extension to signal the support of this mechanism. But it turns out, after some reading of the spec, that doesn't actually work with TLS 1.3. The client is only allowed to send the extension in its certificate message if it has seen the corresponding extension in the certificate request message from the TLS server side. So it can't really be optional on the server side. So the text in the draft has been modified to fix to address this. So folks, if you could please give a careful read and make sure we got all the language right in the draft on this point, that would be appreciated. Next slide. Okay, and here's the specific citation from RFC 8446 TLS 1.3 about that, which says extensions in the certificate message from the client must correspond to extensions in the certificate request message from the server. Next slide. And here's a quick updated protocol annotation diagram with the relevant information highlighted in red. It's just the thing on the right-hand side, the Dane client ID extension in the certificate message. That's no longer optional until TLS 1.3. Next slide. Okay, so there was one other comment on the list during the adoption call about the content of the draft specifically, and that was from Michael Richardson, who says that the introduction is weak in the client authentication draft. So that was kind of intentional. This is mainly a protocol specification document and didn't go into a great amount of detail about application use cases specifically. But I think I do agree with Michael's later comment that integration of this draft with a treatment of that latter subject about use cases in the architecture document will likely address that. But if there's additional text that anyone feels should go into the protocol specifications document, please bring it up and we can discuss and decide what to do about that. And yeah, I'd be happy to fix the capitalization of IoT to conform to the existing norms in that space. And the next slide. To sum things up, we think the protocol documents are largely done, and we're looking for feedback about anything that's missing from them or needs to be clarified or expanded. As you just saw, one issue already came up earlier today from the conversation with Hannes and Gail about whether even in TLS 1.3 we should send an MP extension in the client hello message. So I guess we should have a chat about that and decide if that should go into the document. That actually was one of the, I'm reminded, one of the original rationales for existence of the client ID draft. And that came from a discussion actually with, many years ago with Victor Duchovny to deal with the use case in the SMTP transport security community where you couldn't actually prompt, on the server side, you couldn't prompt the client for a certificate message, a client certificate unilaterally because there were lots of broken TLS stacks in use in the SMTP client arena where they would get confused by that. So the server would need an explicit indication from the client that it wanted to do Dane authentication, and only then would the server actually prompt the client for a certificate, right? I mean, that's dealing with broken behavior, so I wasn't a big fan of that, but that was one of the one of the reasons, one of the original rationales for the client ID extension. So, down the road, other reasons came up, such as, surgically picking out a client identity from a certificate or supporting TLSA with raw public key authentication. So I do think the plan work on the architecture document may inform other things that need to be added to the draft, but I don't know what those might be at the moment. And the same goes for implementation experience. And I think we've already had a little bit of discussion about that today. And with that, I think I'll stop. So I have some filler slide at the end for people who aren't familiar with the entire protocol. They can go through that, but I'm not planning to talk about that today unless discussion points arise. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, I would say that the audience in the room probably already has seen them, so most of them. But anybody have questions or comments for the documents? I appreciate everybody having read them again and being willing to work on them. I appreciate that greatly. Anybody have things they want to discuss or bring up? Certainly the musts versus shoulds are a good thing for everybody to make sure are right. That's always often a contentious point. Other than that, Shuman, it looks like you're good. All right. Supposedly, Ali has fixed his microphone issue. So you want to come back?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes, there we go. All right. Awesome.
Fantastic.
So you don't have slides, so you just want to chat about where we are with respect to the document. It's from a chair's point of view, it's grown greatly, and it's neat to see so many use cases spelled out in it. But go ahead.
Yeah, I apologize for my lack of PowerPoint skills this week, but I had to jump in unexpectedly. The architecture document, as it is a collection of thoughts, ideas, and a lot of empty pointers. As a working group, we should properly take that and sort it out. I forwarded to the mailing list this morning. I understand if people haven't followed up on everything on mail today, but we had an earlier discussion in November about the structure of documents. And based on that, I think we need to include the dancing rules in the architecture document. That means helping people that write implementation documents, like I potentially could do for SIP or WebRTC and others. Another topic is IoT, on considerations and requirements for those documents. And that means that the IoT usage that is pretty detailed in today's architecture document should properly move out to an implementation document. But because of changes in the employment, I believe the current editor has limited capability to do that. So I should probably try to find other people to work with, or take a first stab at it myself to reorganize the architecture document. But as Shuman pointed out, we need an architecture document to go in line with the rest of our documents. That's pretty much all I have to say. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I want one point is Ashes unfortunately has had to move away from his role in editing these documents, and there is sort of a replacement author kind of stepping in as well. But if it'd be beneficial, if the author teams wish, it would be beneficial to find additional editors to help push these forward, especially the architecture document is fairly large. Please do reach out to the chairs and we can negotiate whether more help is needed. I suspect that the architecture document is fairly large in particular. Hannes is running to the mic.
Hi. Yeah, I had participated in earlier discussions, but then sort of like got lost in other activities. And so just help me to provide a little bit or get a little bit of context. So the architecture document, is that still an individual document? Is that the one you're referring to, or are we talking about something else here?
Yeah, it's not currently a working group document. It's an individual document with a couple of authors. Yes.
Okay. And like,
It-
so I hear you, Ole, saying essentially you want to sort of cut that architecture into pieces and have a sort of like classical architecture document, but then implement this guidance document for individual areas like IoT, SIP, and you mentioned other things. Is that
Yeah,
what the plan
yeah.
is in the group?
That was what we discussed in November, saying that the architecture document, which was really the document we had at the BOF, should be slimmed down to more a classical, as you say, architecture document, but also include rules and requirements for implementers that want to write documents for the various other areas like IoT, like SIP or other things. Yes.
Point of order from what we agreed to during the chartering discussion was we would start with the two existing solution documents, and we would add an architecture document to help lay out the framework, and that additional protocols and things like that would be, subject to rechartering at some point in the future after we got stuff done. There, you're absolutely right. There's a contention between how much individual protocols can we put into the architecture document. I think defining the use case examples is a safe way to do that, right? You could include pieces in the architecture document for this is how we expect it to be used, but we're not defining it now.
Not normative text. So
I'm curious whether it makes you whether you want to adopt an architecture document as a working group item to actually then make some progress on this rather than having it languish around in the working group as an individual document for a while. You had all these, I remember we had these discussions during the chartering process, and there was an IoT use case which was pretty fancy, and I'm hoping to see some of that sort of being sort of picked up somewhere and showcased and so on, or like hackathon wise and described also in some architecture document. I think that would be pretty cool. But I understand like they're obviously like the EAP use case and other use case which are more like nuances of the architecture, and yeah, I don't know.
So the reason one of the other things that came out of the chartering discussion was to push especially the solutions forward without letting them languish behind. So that's actually the reason I did the call for adoption for them first. They were really ready to go. If the architecture document, if people feel that it is ready to be adopted, we will certainly call a call for adoption, and I would let Ollie and the authors actually discuss or dictate when that might be, when a good time to do that might be. I know Jim is asking in chat as well, why hasn't it been adopted? Last I checked, there were still sections that weren't fully fleshed out.
So we probably need to take a stab at cleaning up a bit before that, but I can come up with a proposal on that for discussion. There is also some technical issues, but I'm sure we can solve that quickly. That I think Ash is the one with the commit rights on the GitHub repo, but that's things that are easy to solve.
Yeah, that's a management issue. All right, Barry, you have a comment?
This is Barry Leba. I always question why we often seem to think that documents have to be substantially ready before they're adopted. The working group is going to be working on the document. If we're going to do an architecture document and we have a framework for it, even an outline, we should just adopt it and call it a working group product and start working on it.
Great.
Right. So let me ask a different question. Is there any objection to doing I will call for a call for adoption? Anybody actually think it would be a bad idea to adopt it as is? Or Ollie, are you okay with it if we issue it now?
Absolutely. I'm okay.
All right. There's a lot of agreements and plus ones in chat. So Joey and I will probably start that next week.
We probably need to bring up what we agreed on the mailing list there as well. But
Barry's 100% right. It does not need to be finished. It just needs to be the point where the working group thinks that the rough layout outline, as Barry put it, is in good shape. And last I looked at it, I think it is. So excellent. I think we will issue that next week then.
Great.
Okay. Anything else from you?
Nope.
Okay. That actually brings us to the end of the agenda. As I said, I was debating when I was selecting a room. We've always filled 2 hours before with discussion, and we did not this time. So I think, next time, unless we think that there's a lot more content, we'll probably shoot for a 1 hour slot to leave these larger slots open for more discussion. So do keep that in mind. And I think next time I will default to 1 hour unless people feel like we have a lot more based on discussions on the mailing list and stuff as well. So anybody have anything for open mic or other solutions that you want to discuss with respect to dance related technologies? Okay, I don't see anybody dancing to the microphone. So I think with that, we will close very, very early and call it good. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and good progress today. And we will issue a call for adoption shortly and send a note to the mailing list. Thank you, Paul, for helping out in the room. Thank you, Tim, very much for taking notes. I've been following them along.
Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
Oh,